Things We Imagine, the series all about filling your Black, Indigenous, Person of Color fantasy index. I'm Porshèa.
And I'm Bayana. We're starting off the series by speaking with 2021 debut fantasy authors about their writing inspirations and aspirations.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today on Things We Imagine. I just want to start off our roundtable discussion with, would you mind starting us off by sharing your name and a brief summary of your debut novel?
I'm Dhonielle, and I'm the author of Wings of Ebony, which is out on January 26th from Simon & Schuster. It is a young adult fantasy about a Black teen from the inner city neighborhood who must lean into her ancestors' magic to protect her community from drugs, violence, and crime.
My name is B.B. Alston. I'm the author of Mari and the Night Brothers. It's about a 12-year-old girl. She's desperate to find her older brother. So she goes to this mysterious summer camp at the secretive bureau. And that's where she learns that supernatural creatures from myths and legends are all real. And it's more of a story, just kind of her learning to believe in herself and kind of accept herself for who she is. So that's what it's about.
Hi, my name is Namina Forna. I am the author of The Gilded Ones, which comes out February 9th. 2021. The Gilded Ones is a YA fantasy novel that is set in a world where every 16-year-old girl must go through what's known as the ritual of purity. Pure is red blood, impure is golden blood. When my main character, Deka, discovers that she's impure, everyone thinks that she's a demon because girls like her are faster and stronger than regular humans, and each has only one way they can die. So they decide to kill her, or at least try to figure out how to kill her until she gets a reprieve from a mysterious woman telling her that a group of creatures is invading their world, and the emperor has decided to create an army of girls to go out and fight it. So Deka decides to join the army and thus starts her adventure.
I don't have a book with me, but I'm Nicole Glover, the author of The Conductors, out in March 2nd of this year. It's historical fantasy set in 1870s Philadelphia following former Underground Railroad conductors who decide after the Civil War that the best thing they could do with their skills is solve murder mysteries, with magic, of course. The book is centered around a murder of a close friend and follows the fallout and aftermath following that death and an investigation within their community and also with their friend circle, all that stuff, with lots of magical mayhem thrown in there.
My name is Shannon Smart. I am the author of Witches Steeped in Gold. It releases April 20th of this year, and it follows two witches from rival orders, Jasmine and Ira, who are forced to team up in order to take down a mutual threat. Lots of treachery, backstabbing, and hijinks ensue as these two girls who absolutely hate each other are forced to work together.
What are some inspirations for your story specifically, and then just generally in your writing?
So my inspiration, I maybe somewhat selfishly wrote Witches Steeped in Gold as complete wish fulfillment. I wanted to read a book about two Black witches who were living in this world that felt very much so like a character in itself, in that it enforces all of these limits and parameters within their lives, and they have to navigate around those, as well as dealing with when they would meet their two orders. So Witches Steeped in Gold is a mashup of everything that I love: unreliable narration, magic, fantasy world, Jamaican inspired, and yes, I wrote it for myself, essentially. And as far as influence, I mean, I take influence from everywhere. I read An Ember in the Ashes, and that's what really kickstarted my journey to writing the book. More recent books I've read that I've absolutely been inspired by are definitely The Gilded Ones and also Raybearer. I was really fortunate to read advanced copies of those books, and the writing, the world building, the scope of this Black girl magic, I absolutely loved it, and that's definitely something that I endeavour to include in my own writing.
Well, after that, I definitely have to go next and say thank you. Like, my heart just went like this. My inspiration for The Gilded Ones, honestly, the book came from a dream. When I was in undergrad at Spelman College, I started having a recurring dream about this girl. She's wearing golden armor. She's climbing up a battlefield. And she like jumps up into the air, two swords, one sword in each hand, and the dream cuts out. And I never knew where it went, but I knew that there was something about that girl. And so that's how sort of the story years later came to be. As far as sort of touchstones that I used while I was writing the book, typically when I'm working in one medium, I use another as a reference. So for the Gilded Ones, my references were 300 and Spartacus, Blood and Sand, which explains why it's such a brutal book. But in general, I have so many, many different people that have inspired me. I've loved, of course, Octavia Butler, Toni Morrison, Neil Gaiman, John Mortimer, who's like this British writer that I absolutely love. Basically, if it was an old fantasy, I read it and I loved it, and all of those were my inspirations.
I can jump in. I read so both Shannon's book and Namina's book are incredibly inspiring to me. I've only seen pieces of Shannon's. If I were in, where you are in London, I would definitely go knock on your door and let me read all of it. But I got an arc of Gilded Ones last year, and both of those books are just, from everything I've seen, just absolutely stunning. Like books that will be talked about by our grandchildren. And so definitely an inspiration, lots of inspiration here. And then I'd say Ember the Ashes was also a big one for me, just series-wise, world-wise, constructing arcs over multiple books and really looking at how to take a character through sort of stages of development in multiple books was something that I was very inspired by in Saba's work. On the contemporary side, I am, and still am, very inspired by Nick Stone, Jacqueline Woodson, Jason Reynolds. I really, really love contemporary stories. I've read at least as many contemporary stories as I have fantasy. And I found myself on the page a little bit more often in a contemporary book. And so when I was looking to craft a world and to craft a story, I too sort of selfishly wanted to make something that I hadn't seen. This specific narrative was born out of grief and frustration, I think, because similarly to Namina, I had an image in my mind. Mine was more of a voice and sort of like one sort of frozen image in my mind of a girl standing over a body on a sidewalk. And she was standing like in her neighborhood. It just looked like one of the streets, by where I grew up. And she was just very angry and she felt very powerless to stop this. I had no context to this image in my mind. I just had her anger and her rage and her feeling powerless. And I wanted to give her power. She's this kid from the hood where I grew up. The neighborhood is very much inspired by my home, which is 3rd Ward of Houston, which is where George Floyd grew up. And I wanted to write a story like I hadn't seen before. I wanted to write a story where I put magic in those kids' hands and showed them their power. So that is how Wings of Ebony was born.
And go next. So probably the biggest inspiration for the story is probably Men in Black. And I was watching it one day and I kind of thought to myself, what if it wasn't just aliens? What if it was, all the supernatural creatures we kind of say are myth and legend. And it, it kind of spiraled on from there. And I kind of wondered, what if a kid like I was went to like a Hogwarts, and I kind of put those two ideas together. And that's how I came up with the story. As far as books that, influenced me, I guess probably the biggest influence for me was probably like an Angie Thomas and Nick Stone, just because right around the time I was writing this and I decided I wanted to, kind of put a Black character in there. There really wasn't any, Black fantasy characters. And I kind of struggled with, how much of myself could I put in the character? How much do they really want to read about a kid from the hood, So kind of reading those books and seeing how well they did and how well they were executed in those books and what it felt like to see myself in those characters and, kind of know the lingo and and the inside jokes. And that kind of gave me the courage to write Amari. As far as more recently, definitely Wings of Ebony and Wishes Steeped in Gold, books I've read recently. And those books are just so good. And I guess just see strong Black characters, just kicking butt, especially women, because you don't see that much, especially in books. I think that's pretty amazing. So that's my inspirations.
And I guess I'm going last. For the conductors, it came lots of how the story came about it's weird, kind of weird. I always have when I write stories like different idea, like I had ideas have down lists. And for a while I had an idea like pretty much of historical story about conductors, basically, because it's always a thing that interests me history wise. But it always was like I never really was going anywhere with the story until I decided I was going to throw in some magic and some mystery into it, and just because it kind of clicked together that way. It's before I always had these characters in mind, the main characters. I had always had that from the start, but once I added the genre stuff into it, it started kind of slowly started coming together. And it's weird. This process is like I always loved like fantasy stories and whatnot, but I've always been a big fan of like the typical murder mysteries and stuff like that. And that was kind of fun to add it in there. But the biggest key in some ways was the kind of historical aspects to it. The story is set in the Reconstruction era, and it was something I learned a lot of the historical research as I was writing the book at the same time. And it's just interesting finding out certain things, but also finding ways to kind of interact it with the fantastical elements with the book. It allowed me to have fun to kind of explore what's going on with it. And through writing it, I kind of explore or kind of revisit old folk stories, folk tales, like Virginia Hamilton's collection of folk stories, that as I revisit them as I was writing the book. And because I remember reading some when I was younger and just revisiting those stories, and I got to see them in different lights and got inspired in some ways. I think I even had an Easter egg to one of the folk stories in the book. And I don't know, it's for other influences. I mean, I've read so many books as a kid that if I listed them out, I'd probably keep writing them. I always remember these random books all the time, all the stuff I just read. And I think it's a combination of just reading lots of different genres, experiencing a lot of different stories, but also at the same time, not seeing myself in a lot of different ones too. It mostly kind of was driven to make me a story that's different and unique, but also something that echoes what I read, but also still kind of unique to my own voice for certain things, and kind of reflecting and bit different stuff. And I get excited seeing the rise. It's all the rise of this Black fantasy, Black spectacle fiction rising up, that as a kid I would love to been in the kid right now, to see all those options that I didn't have growing up. So
yeah, thank you all for sharing. These are all such great moments, from wanting to look into Black history and putting a spotlight on the magic of being Black even in those times, and more contemporary settings as well, and just celebrating that. Could you share with us what brought you, whenever you were writing, as you were writing, what brought you the most joy as you were writing the stories, from being able to put into place the stories that you wish that you could have read or wanted to read, or what brought you moments that you were contemplative or on where you're just this isn't very joyful to write, but I feel like it's necessary? If you can share that without spoiling, I know that could be kind of hard.
I can say without spoiling. Okay, let's see. Challenge accepted. I would say I was very joyful. My book is very gritty, so it's kind of hard to I would say it was very cathartic for me to be able to put my community on the page in a way that doesn't fit the narrative that you see on the media, in a way that shows the heart of my home and my community, the unity, the love, the togetherness, what it takes a village really means. So writing that on the page, there's a lot of just really strong community bonds on my in my story. And you really do, like, there's a grandma character, and no spoilers, but like you will love her very, very much. She's very dear. And like, I wanted to write her in such a way that she feels like everyone's grandma and you just want to hug her and squeeze her. I named her after my deceased grandma, actually. So anyway, that was part of it, like putting this sort of, giving, showing what my home is really like. And I realize that a lot of readers coming to the pages of my book will have only seen headlines or will unfortunately believe the things that they see on TV and not realize that it's a very distorted narrative that wants to paint my community in a certain way. And so it was incredibly cathartic and joyful to be able to tell a different story. And then I will just say the very final chapter is like, I have goosebumps. Like it feels good.
Anyone else for the joyful challenge?
I'll go for that too. It's interesting. It's writing a historical stuff, with the fantasy stuff into it as well. It's difficult. I think I did it. All the research I did, it's hard research to do, to go through all this stuff, figure out what's limits, how much I want to put on page. And also try, I guess, because I also want, because I'm well aware of, all the I guess the Black trauma stories, basically. And I'm always worried that am I putting too much in here or pulling it back or even making light of it? Because my focus was more about playing with the mystery and the fantasy aspects of it, not really much of the history side of it. So I a lot of times got worried, like, am I making too light such situations, or am I making too fun of certain things? And all that kind of stuff, and just feeling the burden, like if it's just because it's history, do I have to show the bad sides of it? And my part of the joy I kind of found in researching is finding all this like little known facts about Philadelphia in that time period, of all like the social gatherings, all the community, the strong community that they had in that time period, which I didn't really was aware about as I did my research, before I did my research for it. And it was kind of fun, it kind of exploring like little known, like you can say, the hidden figures of stuff about the history parts of them, putting that in there. And I don't know, it's kind of also in a weird way, finding some historical facts that kind of fit really well together with the narrative I was building. That's always, it's like, I think I was doing something yesterday when I found something in Jay's store that was like perfect for like a certain historical thing. But I don't know, I think also the joy was also just playing with magic in there, is just seeing basically how all it comes together. And I don't know, making it kind of fun to kind of explore the history. Because I think, I don't know, I don't know, it's a, it's a challenge in some ways to put this together, and it's kind of fun to explore what I can do with it and see what happens with it. And
I'll go. So with Witches Steeped in Gold, to kind of backtrack to the inspiration question, I was heavily influenced by the history of the world. But Witches Steeped in Gold is not a historical fantasy. So it draws on elements of Jamaican culture, in particular, this extremely taboo magic system. But it finds joy in the trauma without trivializing it. So there are historical figures of great importance in Jamaica who fought in wars, who led resistances. And that spirit is something that I have subliminally channeled in Witches Steeped in Gold. But obviously, in researching these historical figures, obviously I live in England and our history lessons are incredibly Americanized. I didn't learn about these things until I became a teacher myself. And John Agard is this fantastic Caribbean poet, and he wrote a poem called Checking Out the History, and I was teaching this to a group of kids, and I was learning so much about my own culture and taking so much joy from the experience and using that joy to sort of authenticate the world building in which is steeped in gold. But also it's there's joy, but there's obviously, as I've said, trauma and tragedy, and striking that balance and walking that line without trivializing, without resorting to history. So obviously most of it is made up, was was tough, but also incredibly fulfilling for me, learning more about where I've come from and putting that into the book and having discussions with my mum, who was born in Jamaica, and talking with my maternal aunts, some of whom still live in Jamaica. So for me, there was a lot of joy in learning about the influences that I have permeated, which is steeped in gold with.
I guess for me, the joy was probably mostly in Amari's journey. She starts off, this poor Black kid in this white, majority white school in the affluent neighborhood, and she doesn't have a lot of self-confidence. She fights against stereotypes, like for her brother. I think when he was missing, the cops automatically think he was into something, negative, and so she'll fight that stereotype. But at the same time, she accepts the stereotypes that she's lesser than, and so kind of seeing her journey from seeing herself as less than, and then kind of learning to grow and accept herself. That was probably the biggest journey for me, because that's the journey I had myself. Just kind of learning to see yourself as more than those stereotypes. So just kind of seeing that journey for me was probably the biggest joy for me.
So for me, the joy in the Gilded Ones was the sisterhood. I think oftentimes when we see stories about groups of women, they're in conflict with each other. And that has never been my experience. I always find female-centric spaces to be very warm and welcoming. And that's what I wanted to put out into the world. And so the most fun that I had with writing the Gilded Ones was writing the parts where the girls are just chatting, or where they're sticking up for each other, or where they're kicking butt together. Because at the point at which I wrote the Gilded Ones, I really hadn't seen armies of women fighting. And that was something that I really wanted. I remember watching 300 and being like, I really want that, but with all girls. And so that for me is the best part of the Gilded Ones, and it's the one that brings me the most joy.
So sort of going off of the joy part of it, what part, because I know writing and that process can be rewarding, but there are a lot of ups and downs. So what was kind of your this is it moment within the process of writing this book, where you were just this is what it's supposed to be, this is what I'm supposed to be writing? Where in the process did that kind of really sink in?
I wrote this book over, I guess, the course of about 3 years before I got picked up by someone. And I put it down for different projects in that time period, but I always kept wanting to come back to it because the characters were appealing to me. I felt they had the story they wanted. They had the story I wanted to tell with them. They kept telling me they had the story they wanted to tell, and that kept bringing me back to the story and making me want to keep working and to get it to where the story needs to be, to to suit them more or less. And I think that's basically kind of as to figure out to where it was. I think that's, I don't know, it's for me, and even though it's on its way to the printers right now, I still feel there's tons to do. You always feel you have to keep revising and all those little things, but I do feel comfortable. In my last read through, I did feel this is pretty much the vision I want it to be. And there could be tiny little things that could change, but it's very close to what the ideal I had, even though I didn't really have that at the beginning, when I first started.
I can go next. So I had actually 2 this is it moments. When I initially wrote the Gilded Ones, it was around 2012. And I shopped it out. And it never went anywhere. People were like, there's just no place in the market for this. And so my first this is it moment, I was writing clickbait. This was around, I think, 2017 or 2018. I think it was 2017. And part of my job was sort of see what was trending. And so I start seeing promos of Black Panther and seeing the sort of the reception that it's getting on social media. And I'm like, oh, it's finally time for this book. So I call my agent. I'm like, I have a book. It needs a page 1 rewrite. Give me a month and a half, give me 2 months to get it done. And so I wrote it and I sent it into her. And that was just, I feel, the time. The second time that I had the this is it moment was in finally getting the character, my main character, Dacre, right. because initially when I wrote her as like sort of this Buffy figure who's very strong and very like, and she's already like popular and all these things. But then when I started really thinking about Deka's journey, the things that she had to go through and the woman that she had to become, I realized, I had to start off with a girl who, because this is a patriarchal world, I have to start off with a girl who is obedient, who truly believes in everything that she's being told. And the moment that I made that switch, that was when things clicked together, because I'm like, oh, here she is. You know, she's not strong, at least not on the outside that you would see. She's this really vulnerable person who is seeking her place in life. And along the way, she gets strong, and along the way, she learns. And the moment those things clicked into place, that's when I was like, okay, this is it.
So for me, Witches Steeped in Gold has been on a journey. I first started writing it in 2016, and it wasn't really until I spoke with a Black agent, and I had like an agent one-to-one, and I sat down with her at a conference, and I was like, I have this idea, and the witches are Caribbean inspired, but the world isn't. The world feels really Western. And she said, and I said, I was thinking about setting it in a Jamaican inspired world, but there's no books like this. And she was like, set it in the Jamaican inspired world. So I completely rewrote it, and was read by various people. I did pitch wars briefly, and then I signed with my agent. But it wasn't really until I signed with my the book sold, and I was like, okay, I'm actually going to be published, where I felt like I could really like unleash essentially and pack this book with all the things that I had initially set about including in it. And that in part is due to writers like Tomi and Saba and Namina, whose books had already sold and were already making waves, that left space, or created space rather, for more books with Black protagonists. So I think when everything clicked, it was when my book had sold to Harper, and I was like, okay, it's sold, now we can just go crazy. Yeah.
I can go next. So my book too has been on a very long journey. The draft on shelves is, I think, draft 19. I've rewritten it multiple times, and it's been a fight to get the book on shelves. And I know it is for every writer. But as I was on submission, actually, I got an R&R phone call from an editor, and she just had really great things to say, with lots of buts, like buts as to why it wasn't a story that she could offer on to acquire yet, but she saw a lot of merit in it, and she saw a lot of promise in the writing and just the story and the main character, which is what most people enjoy the most about the book. So when I took she asked me to take her feedback and then sit with it and then revise 50 pages and send it back in. And she can definitely offer on a partial. And she didn't ask for an exclusive, so I was able to do that and then send it to every single other editor who was still considering too. So when I sat down, it took me 3 weeks to kind of figure out, because what she wanted would completely change, the magic system and change a lot about the book. And it was in that moment that I was sort of able to separate myself from this sort of urgency, this sort of race to try to get a book on shelves while I still have a chance. I had a lot of momentum from Div Pit because my pitch blew up and I had all of these editor requests. So I was sort of riding the wave of all of that and sort of losing sight of really sitting in that moment and making sure that the story that I'm sending them is the story I wanted to tell. And I realized I wasn't really breathing, if that makes sense. Like I was just going and trying and reaching and hoping someone would give me a shot. And when I had that call with her and realized how close I was and how many, even the passes that came in from editors were very kind and complimentary, I sat with her notes for 3 weeks and I sat with my character and realized that my book wasn't just about a girl saving her community and like people she cares about from her community. It was about why those people needed saving and why she felt powerless and where her power comes from. And so when I created the revision, the 50-page revision and revised synopsis, it was a full rewrite. And somehow the main character was exactly the same. Like her heart, her energy, her tone, her voice was still there. But what she did and how she did it was totally different. And that was the moment that I realized that my book wasn't just about sort of her story in this make-believe world, and yet a larger story about racism and privilege and allyship and colonization and cultural appropriation. And once I really dug into those themes, that's when the book sold.
So for me, I guess like a lot of people here, the book's been on a long journey. I think I started maybe 2014, 2015-ish. And it wasn't even supposed to be a book. It was just something I would do in my study breaks because I was, my science classes from getting ready for med school. And so I just kind of started off just creating a world. I had the idea about men in Black and if everything existed. And that was just something fun I would do to kind of mess around with, every 15 minutes. And then I got the idea for Amari. And I said, well, maybe I might have a story here. And I remember taking it to my little writing group. And I got the advice that, the world's really cool, but you'll never sell it if you have a Black character. Look, that sounds super harsh now, but I think they were coming from a good place because looking around at that time, there just wasn't any books with Black characters as far as, fantasy books. Nothing you could point to. It's like, oh, that's what this is like, And so I kind of took that advice, and I tried to do a typical white male character, kid character, and I did that for maybe like a month. And I said, what, this isn't working. I need to do what I started off doing, and so I put Amari back in the story, and that was really this is it moment for me because I was able to leave the stuff in that I was taking out with the other characters. And I realized that was the story more than the magic and the supernatural creatures. It was about a girl, from my background, learning to believe in herself, learning to accept herself, the things she couldn't change about herself. So that was kind of the big moment for me.
So yeah, like what is what's kind of making what I'm hearing from all of your different things is that you, while you're writing like fantasy worlds, like it sounds like what you really had to do and like the writing process and to get this fantasy story out was stay true to yourselves and like actually dig deeper into like who you were and what was inspiring to you. So that's something that we want to like in this series explore much more. What is it about like these fantasy worlds that we develop that are actually like that resonate with other people, but also resonate within ourselves? And as we were talking earlier about different influences, it kind of like struck me that a lot of people here, which is not surprising, made a lot of influences that were books. But if you could you give us, besides Men in Black, of course, because like it was like started like as comics and like became a movie. But could you share with us your fantasy faves that are possibly like a book, but also like movie or TV shows, music, like anything, your top three fantasy faves that you would recommend to anyone else who like you just love it so much you wish people could like watch it more, read it more, etc.
I can go because my comps are pretty much movies. So my book is sort of like Wakanda and Black Panther meets like Diana from Wonder Woman with a very Beyonce vibe because Houston. So if you liked Black Panther, if you like The Hate You Give is also a comp title, and that was a movie too. But if you like that sort of feministy, powerful, badass energy of Wonder Woman, like it has that vibe with sort of a type of magic that has an Afrofuturism tone to it, like in Wakanda. And then you have, it's very, very Houston. I wanted to make my book just very home. And so I think that like the contemporary world comes through very much too.
So Witches Steeped in Gold is definitely inspired by Game of Thrones. I loved how brutal and cutthroat that world was and how you've got these different individuals vying for one thing, and that's definitely something that Witches Steeped in Gold encompasses. And also Black Panther. So I did lots of comic book research because I'm the only girl. I've got 5 brothers, so Marvel, DC, whatever else was very much so a staple in my household. And when I was researching comp titles, when I was querying like way back in 2018, I came across Black Panther, and then they were making it into a movie, and I was so excited. And the world in Witches Steeped in Gold isn't overly similar to the world in Wakanda, which is very, as JL said, Afrofuturistic. It's kind of something of its own beast, but what I really loved was how Black Panther was so culturally inspired, and that definitely is something that I took and used when writing Witches Steeped in Gold. And then obviously An Ember in the Ashes was hugely inspirational. It's written in dual POV, and I definitely turned to Saba's wisdom, because Witches is dual POV, and balancing those two perspectives and having them meet while also still being separate is, you know, it was tough. So I turned to the master to help me out with that.
If I'm going to do comps for the Gilded Ones, I've already spoken about 300 and Black Panther and such. So I would say that the scope of the world is very Lord of the Rings. I would say that the girl power is very Wonder Woman, like the first part where they're all fighting together. And of course, like all the scenes in Black Panther with the Dora Milaje. And I would say actually the OG reference that I have, there is a video, a music video called Agolo by Angelique Kidjo. Like if you ever want to see really what I had in my head in terms of the glory of this world and all the gold and these ancient gods and spirits and all these things, watch the video Agolo by Angelique Kidjo. It's my favorite music video of all time. And I think I watched it at such a developmental age that it is actually probably, if I dig down, where the Gilded Ones came from.
I guess I can go. I don't know if I have 3. Oh, was somebody else about to go? I'm sorry, I cut somebody off. Okay. I think for me, probably X-Men is probably a big one that you might not think of maybe right away. But basically in the Bureau, everybody gets their own like supernatural ability, and I just love the way that kind of sets your world. And it kind of how would you use all that power if you had it? And what kind of social dynamics does that create? And so I thought that was a lot of fun to play with within the story. As far as temptation, what would you do? Would you use it for good? Would you use it for bad? So that type of thing. That was a huge inspiration for my story.
I've been thinking about this. Everyone's talking about all these comps, and I don't know. I always hate the comp question. I don't really have really good ones for this. It's always hard to find a good one. I mean, I could probably point to a bunch of different, I guess, murder mystery stuff. I remember like watching Clue. There was like another like a satire like Murder by Death. I remember watching around the same time, and a lot of those things. And I don't know. I guess maybe even some video games. I've played a lot, even though they're like a really like a stretch, but more like since a lot of them are like a lot of the Final Fantasy games, Final Fantasy X in particular is like it's basically about a group. It has nothing involved with my book, but I always think it's like a tight storyline. It's a party group and stuff like that, and I like having I like having a good strong cast of characters in my books. So I think that's in some ways it comes out of video games and that sort of things. But I don't know, but it's hard to really think of like some really good comps for that other than, I don't know, just fairly like fairy tales and folk stories. I kind of, nothing in particular, but like the overall gist of them, like you don't know there's different variations for stuff and you don't really know exactly what's folk tale or fairy tale is true. But yeah, that's pretty much it.
Awesome. Well, thank you all for joining us today and for sharing and telling us more about your stories and your inspirations behind them. I know we're super excited to read and to like get these books. So hopefully, I mean, I'm sure our audience at this point is like, they already got everything queued up in the in their carts. But yeah, maybe we can real quick go around and just tell folks where they can find you. Yeah.
My name is Namina Forna. You can find me on Twitter at Namina Forna. You can find me on Instagram at namina.forna. And you can find me on my website, naminaforna.com.
I am Shannon Smart, and you can find me mostly on Instagram at author Shannon Smart, on Twitter at Shannon S. And I also have a website, shannonsmart.com. And Shannon is spelt Ciannon. Don't blame me, blame the parents.
I'm JL, and you can find me on Twitter at authorj_L, that's spelled ELLE, and on Instagram at authorj.Lelle. And then you can find me at my website at wingsofebony.com.
Okay, you can find me. My name is BB Austin. You can find me on Instagram and Twitter at BB_Austin. And then my website is BBAustin.com.
Nicole Glover, and I'm on Twitter with the at Nicole Glower. Replace the V with a W. And my website is nicole-glover.com.
So much for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
So we just heard some amazing comps and recommendations, which reminds me of one of my own. This isn't strictly fantasy, but it helps me to write, and I write fantasy. So ergo, it connects. Nightmare Vacation, which is the debut album from Rico Nasty, it just came out a couple months ago, it's pretty much been getting me through like drafting and revisions, and it bangs. So, you know, you should listen to that if you haven't already. Is there a fantasy rec that you would like to share, Porshèa?
Yeah, while like Nightmare Vacation sounds like a real like fantasy like feel, so I don't even care like if that's real. It's fun like fantasy.
It sounds tight. It sounds like it fits.
All right, like who goes on Nightmare Vacation in fantasy worlds? That's what dreams are. Boom, we got it. For me, I think like hearing all the fantasy worlds from all the different authors that we talked to today, I just felt like I needed to like have another fantasy world kind of like compilation, like just like our video series is doing. This is what you get in this one anthology called A Universe of Wishes. It's one of my favorite anthologies to come out recently. It came out in December of 2020. And when I tell you that like you get such clear voices of these different worlds, even though it's an anthology, so you're getting like little snippets of each of the worlds, it's such a good anthology. And I feel like it's the most like quality I've gotten an anthology in a while. It's really good. And that's it for this episode's Fantasy Rex. Thank you for joining us for this exploration of some 2021 debut fantasy books.
If you'd like to join us for more great talks with Black, Indigenous, people of color fantasy creators, make sure to hit that subscribe button, follow us on Twitter at Black Girls Create, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks for joining us.